Hello and welcome to this pattern recognition video featuring simplification patterns. Okay, in this first problem, we have a queen that just moved over to f5, and now it's attacking our queen. Now we're trying to simplify down into a winning game, and you want to do that by trading off material. So I'll do 10 puzzles in this video, and you can pause the video at any time if you need to think longer. So what would you do in this position with white to move? We see our queen is under attack, so we have to deal with that. But what is the best way to do that? Take a look, see if you can figure it out. And if you're ready, here we go. All right, the queen could capture black's queen. But then that would just lead to an even trade. The bishop would recapture. But after that, we have our bishop lined up on the knight. So if you were thinking about queen captures the knight first, well, that wouldn't work, of course, because the bishop could just capture you. So in this problem, it looks like queen captures queen, bishop would recapture, and then we would grab this knight and go up a piece there. So capture, and then the knight captures. So now we're ahead by what? An extra knight here, it looks like. Okay, let's move on to the next problem. Hopefully you did well on that last one. So what would you do here? Once again, the queen has moved forward, well, moved to attack our queen. So we have to deal with that. Now when you're trying to choose what move to make, you can use checks, captures, and threats as your guide. Whenever you make a move or whenever your opponent makes a move, it's good to ask yourself, are there any checks, captures, and threats in that order, because checks are most forcing. So you always want to look at those first. But since we don't have any checkmate attack, and this series here, or these problems in this video are about simplification. So we want to simplify down by trading down material to where we come out ahead. And one thing you might want to do also is count up the material to begin with. So we have what? 6 pawns. Our opponent has 6 pawns as well. And then all the rest of the material looks to be even. So how can we gain an advantage here? Well, our queen is under attack. So if we just capture, bishop would recapture. And that's an even trade. But then what could we do? There would be a check available. So we could check with our rook, and that would force a trade. Unless the bishop retreated back and blocked, but then we would just pick off their rook. So their rook would probably capture. We could capture. And then what? So if queen captures, bishop captures, rook checks, rook takes, our bishop takes, and then our next threat could be moving back here to attack this bishop, but their bishop could move down here and defend. So maybe that doesn't work to trade down. It doesn't look like there'll be an advantage by just taking their queen. So maybe we have to do something else first. Hmm. What if we move here with our queen, threatening a checkmate? The opponent would probably have to block with their queen to stop that. And then we could take their queen, their bishop would recapture, and then we would grab their bishop. So this one's a little tougher. Once again, just to make sure, I'll look at the obvious move when you're trying to simplify down to just go ahead and capture the queen, but it doesn't look like that works. So capture, bishop captures, an even trade. What have we accomplished? I don't really see much that we could do there. So, hopefully you're having better luck on this problem. And, these problems randomly come up. I don't, look at them ahead of time. So I'm trying to figure them out just like you are. All right. What else? Maybe there's another possibility in the position. If we just move our rook up here first, that doesn't really do anything because they could just take our queen. All right, and sometimes you overthink things, and the answer is, more simple than you thought. And maybe that's what I'm doing here. Once again, queen captures, the bishop would just capture. And then what do we have after that? If we move our rook up, here, capture, bishop captures. All right. I don't know. I'm thinking the checkmate threat is better. We go here, threaten to mate, and the only way to stop that is to block with the queen. So I'm going to try that. Okay, so that's what they wanted. I guess I was overthinking that problem. All right, well, I hope you did better. It said that was a 1252 rated problem. So I put this rating level for these puzzles at 1,000 to 1,500. If you go much higher, then you might be working more towards calculation and a little bit less pattern recognition. And for those of you, the beginners out there that aren't familiar with pattern recognition, you want to just solve a set of problems. And instead of just doing them once and forgetting about them, you go over a set of problems multiple times until you can solve them faster and faster. And if you do that about 7 times, it'll hopefully be burnt into your long-term memory. So when you're playing, you can just recall these problems much better and have to do less calculation. But as you improve, you'll probably want harder problems. All right. Hopefully you've solved this one already. Maybe I'm talking too much. Okay. What do we have? The bishop has just moved here, pinning our bishop to our queen. But is this a mistake move? What are our options? Now, when you're trying to decide whether to simplify down, you should probably count up the material. So what do we have? 7 pawns. Our opponent has 7 pawns as well. 3 minor pieces versus 3. So material looks to be even. If we capture their bishop, the knight could capture. And it doesn't look like we've gone ahead. But what if the queen grabs that knight? Then the pawn would have to capture, but that would allow us to pick off this rook. And if the king moves, we could grab the other rook. So that would take us ahead in material, and we've traded down a lot of material as well. So I think I'm going to go with that. Let's see if that works. All right, so that's what the answer to the problem was. Let's look at the material. So now we have, as far as pieces, rooks are worth 5 pawns. So 10, 16 points of value, as knights are worth, this is for beginners, knights are worth 3 pawns, rooks are worth 5. So that totals up to 16 versus 9 pawns for the queen and 3, so 12 total for queen and knight. So we come out ahead in that. All right, on to the next problem. What do we have here? All right. Well, it's a simplification puzzle. So, to simplify down, we usually have to either capture or force trades. So maybe we go up here, forking king and rook. So the rook would be forced to capture us. Then our other rook would capture, delivering a check. The king would be forced to move forward, and then I believe we could just move back to here, attacking both the knight and the bishop here. So let's double check that. And that's important too. When you're trying to solve these puzzles, try and do as much in your head as you can before you go moving the pieces around. So we're going to try and go here, forcing a trade. The other rook would recapture with check. The king would have to move forward, and that gives us time to move our rook back to d5, attacking both of these pieces. And there's no way they can both be protected. We want to look for any unexpected checks, which there aren't. Now, if this pawn wasn't here, the bishop could maybe attack our king, giving the knight time to escape. All right, here we go. Check. Check again, and attack both of these pieces. So now we pick off the knight. If that pawn tries to keep running, well, then our king will be able to move over here and stop it. What is the other option? If that runs, well, if this pawn does keep running, we don't want to go after the bishop, because then that pawn would promote. So we would have to move our king here to stop the pawn. All right, on to the next problem. We're almost halfway there. Okay, a bishop has just moved, putting us in check. What do we have here? All right. Checks, captures, and threats. Because we're in check, we have to deal with that immediately. Remember, whenever your king is under attack and it's in check, you have 3 options or less, but at most 3. Capture the attacker, which we could do. Block the attacker, which we could do also with the knight here, or even the rook, but the rook is more valuable than the bishop. They would just take our bishop. So 3 options: capture the attacker, block the attacker, or run. Our king could just move, but because of both bishops, that would not be a good choice. We would have to run back here or up there. Anyway, this is a simplification puzzle, so we need to look at simplifying, which means trading down, trading off pieces. So the obvious move is to just capture the attacker with our knight. Here, rook would capture. Then what would our option be then? Well, all right, this is where a little bit of calculation is involved. Obvious move, take that bishop and the rook would recapture. That would open the opponent's king up to a possible check here. But the king, either the bishop could drop back and block, or the king could move forward. So, capture, rook captures. If we deliver a check up here, if the rook does not retreat and block that check and the king moves forward, what do we have then? Our rook would be under attack. So we could go after this bishop, capturing with check. And if our opponent takes our rook, our queen could capture theirs. I know that was a lot. Try and calculate that out in your head. Pause the video if you need more time. So let's try this. Here we go. Capture. Check. Okay, so we didn't even have to overthink it. They just blocked here. So now, we could just take and simplify down more by trading off more material. So if we take, king is in check, either the queen or the king will have to capture there. And then that would give us time to pick off this other bishop. So that, and we could go here. Now, is that best? I should just double check, because we have to look out for checks. Is there any surprise check that could give us problems? I don't see anything. So now we just make an even queen trade. And after all that, we're ahead by this extra bishop versus a pawn here. And also our pieces are better developed. They still have their pieces in the corner. All right, we're halfway done. Let's finish out the next 5. Oh, what was that? A capture? So I think they just captured a piece there. The obvious move would be to just go ahead and take either with the pawn. Well, maybe that's not so obvious. We have a queen under attack that's unprotected here. So maybe we need to go ahead and capture their queen and then go after this rook. But let's count up the material and see if we're even, ahead, or what is going on in this position. Okay. It looks like we both have rooks and queens. We're down by a piece, so I think the rook just captured something there. They have an extra minor piece versus our extra pawn. So if we take and they recapture with bishop or probably rook, because then they're attacking our knight. So our knight would have to capture, and after that we would be ahead. the exchange and a pawn, I believe. So it looks like we're ahead there. So capture, capture, and that's what they want. So we have a rook and a pawn. So we have an extra pawn as well, but rook versus bishop. So we should be winning in that simplified endgame. All right. Next problem. What do we have? Okay, an interesting move. This knight has just jumped into the center, unleashing a discovered attack on our queen. So we have to deal with that. The problem with that, it looks like our queen's under attack, and what can we do? You might think, oh, I have to retreat or move my queen out of the line of fire. But because they left their knight under attack here, that should help you figure out this one. So what would you do here? Pause as always if you need more time. If not, why don't we just go ahead and capture this rook? We're checking the king, a very forcing move, and forcing moves can help you simplify down even more because it gives your opponent less options. So here we grab the rook, forking king and queen. They would be forced to capture with the queen because the rook is also covering. So once their queen captures ours, our rook would capture, and then they would capture either with the king or rook. Probably the rook would come over to the open file. But that would give us time to pick off their knight and grab that extra piece. So here we go. And now, they would probably capture with this pawn because our rook is targeting that. So they would just capture. And we have that extra knight. Okay, here we go. The final three problems. We have a rook grabbing the half open file here. Also lining up on our king, adding some more pressure. Although this pawn is protected by the pawn behind it. All right. Well, our goal is to simplify down, so we need to initiate some trades of material. And before we do that, let's look and make sure we understand where we stand to begin with. We have 8 pawns versus 7, so they're already down a pawn. Now, material-wise, everything else is even. So, because we're ahead by 1 extra pawn, it's fine for us to just trade off as much material as we can. If we traded off all the pieces, we would have that extra pawn in the endgame. And a lot of times you can win with the extra pawn in the endgame, unless the pawns are blocked up or doubled. That would make it more difficult. But if there's not many doubled pawns, then usually that extra pawn can help you win in the endgame. So I'm thinking, pause if you want to look at it deeper, but if you're ready, I'm thinking we just capture this knight. Now, if they capture with the bishop, then our bishop could capture, and if the knight takes, our queen would take. So, if we start out by taking the knight here, they would probably attack our queen, but then our knight could escape and recapture. So this is a good little pattern. Definitely take a second look at this, because a lot of times it can be a mistake. It looks like their knight and bishop, they're all piling up on our knight. But we capture there, if their bishop captured our bishop, then our knight would have been able to escape. But now we have a battery lined up here. And after all these trades, we come out ahead by this bishop. All right, I hope you got that one. We're down to the final two. Oh, wow. The knight has just, was that a pawn that it captured right in front of our king? Well, let's look at material before we just start trading like crazy. The obvious move is to just take this knight, either with our... I don't think we would want to take that with our knight. Oh, yeah, we could do... No, because they have multiple pieces lined up on that, and we would only have the queen protecting. But we have to be careful, because if we take with our king, could there be a threat of the queen coming up and pinning that? But maybe that doesn't work because our bishop would be lining up there. Okay, so a lot to look at here. So try and pause and calculate if you need to. And the idea with improving your pattern recognition, the first time you go through a more difficult problem, it might take you a while to figure it out. And that's why you want to go over problems multiple times, especially ones that are a little more complicated, because then the next time you see it, you may still have trouble, but hopefully you solve it more quickly. And after a while, you'll start to remember it more and remember the patterns. And in the future, you would be able to just glance at it and say, oh, I remember this. And then you can just solve it much more quickly. Okay. Maybe we don't want that obvious move of just taking the knight. What are our other options? Oh, and let's count up the pieces. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns versus 6. And then 4 minor pieces versus 4. So everything's even. Maybe since this bishop is being targeted by 2 pieces, we're defending it with 2. But if our king takes the knight, like I said, the queen can come in and pin that, possibly. All right. So we have a little bit of calculation to do. What should we do here? I'm still thinking we just take. If we take that, though, our opponent could take here. So, I don't know if that's the right move, just taking with the king. If we take that, I don't think that works because, excuse me, the knight could capture our knight attacking our queen. We'd be forced to capture with bishop or rook. Or pawn, I guess, but then that would give them time to just capture our bishop, and then I don't see much after that. And we don't want to capture with our knight, I don't think, because then they would grab our bishop. All right, let's see what happens. That's what they wanted. So the queen did not come down and try to pin, which could be dangerous because of that bishop would be lined up on the queen if it went here, if he came down here. All right. Well, now it looks like we can just grab this knight to trade down even further. And so that's what they wanted. And now the queen can no longer even pin because the bishop is covering that square after the knight moved away. All right, the final problem. Here we go. We had a knight under attack by our pawn, so the knight jumps to the center here. Let's count up our material. We have 6 pawns versus their 7. And the rest of the material is even. Okay. How can we simplify down in this position? Well, checks, captures, and threats. If we look at that in that order, checks first, we might notice we could go here, checking the opponent's king, attacking the bishop at the same time. And then if they block with the knight or the bishop, we just pick off that bishop. I think that works. All right, I think I'm going to go with that. Then we just pick that off. And then now we might as well just keep trading because we've gone ahead in material. So we'll just trade the queens off as well and just be ahead that extra bishop in the end. All right, well, I hope you did well on these simplification puzzles today. So keep at it. Try to do a little bit of puzzle solving daily if you can to help improve your chess. So as always, leave comments. I love hearing from viewers and subscribers. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you for watching and have a super chess day.